Thanks so much, Karen, and everyone at UNA for the invitation to come speak this afternoon with you about some of the work we've been doing on together, all of us, on this working group that was mentioned a couple times before that I'll tell you a little bit about this afternoon. The U.S. Civil Society Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security, which takes about as much time to say as the acronym itself, so we usually just kind of give it the whole handle there. But what we're signaling there is that we are a group of US-based civil society organizations with expertise in these various components, substantive components of 1325 and the National Action Plan: protection, prevention, peace building, and relief and recovery. So lots of different civil society organizations that have experience on the ground in a number of countries around the world and have seen how this situation that was mentioned by my colleagues really plays out for women. And that civil society has certainly, since the founding resolution 1325 and the subsequent resolutions in the UN system, and throughout the duration of the conversations around the US National Action Plan, played a very strong role in percolating up both voices from the ground of women peace builders, women who are displaced by and affected by conflict and conflict-related violence and the like, and then also worked at the kind of the grass tops policy level to give the nudge, the applause, whatever it is that's really necessary at the time to move these high-level policy processes along that can sound very, convoluted and 30,000-foot level, but are really, really important benchmarks and milestones for the rest of the civil society movement to hook to. I was in the room in the Security Council balcony when Secretary Clinton announced that the U.S. would be writing a national action plan, which was kept very well under wraps, I must say. And the energy in the room was just palpable. It was an immediate reaction that this was the right thing, that there had been certainly allies and advocates within the U.S. system who had been translating the women, peace, and security agenda into results at the policy and program levels, but that signaling to the rest of the world that the U.S. would put together a national action plan with the other countries, which at that time I think was 22 or 4 or somewhere in that number, was very huge. So by way of background, a number of organizations that are involved with the working group currently working on the U.S. National Action Plan implementation had been led by or staffed by individuals who had been very involved in the 1325 development and evaluation of how 1325 was doing in the UN context over the course of a number of years. And so those groups kind of had been working together initially in some sort of less formalized collaborations to say, hey, the 10th anniversary is coming up for 1325. Wouldn't it be great if we got that dialogue going in Washington a little bit more, because that had historically been a very New York-based conversation. And there's a lot of women's groups here in Washington. There's a lot of international development and humanitarian relief groups, policy-oriented, organizations, think tanks, academia. A lot of them didn't actually know that much, if anything, about 1325. And the sense was, this is the moment. We have a Secretary of State who is, our biggest ally. We have an administration that's done things like create a National Council on Women and Girls. This is things are looking good in Washington. Let's see if we can't do something around the 10th anniversary that would signal that U.S. Commitment to this issue area. So had an initial. I don't know if anyone picked up the timeline that was out on the little table out front. But this is basically a good graphic demonstration of everything that I'm just about to breeze through that you can reference, which was the convening of the initial organizations who were talking about these issues with the government and with civil society here in Washington around the 10th anniversary, and then what we've been able to do with a more formal process after that. So basically, the summer before the 10th anniversary, which was June, July of 2010, this group of organizations led by our fearless champion Karen and also our good friends at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is a congressionally funded, not government but not civil society think tank dedicated to peace issues. And so the gender advisor there, Kathleen Kunis, had a number of conversations with these groups and invited in a number of country representatives from governments that had national action plans, as well as representatives from the US government, to talk about looking forward at the 10th anniversary. This is what 1325 is. What do we think the US government is thinking about saying or doing around the 10th anniversary? From that, we had the very exciting news in October 2010 at the Security Council by Secretary Clinton that the US would develop a national action plan. And that was when the energy around creating a formal working group really catalyzed, because the sense was, we've got to bring this issue to Washington, we've got to educate a heck of a lot of people about it, and we've got to get the ball rolling on. She had given a year-long process for developing this plan. So we were looking at the fall of 2011, late fall, early winter, for when this plan would need to be developed. So those initial organizations and a few more hosted a Women in War conference at the U.S. Institute of Peace, where we basically took everything that had happened in New York at the 1325 celebrations in October and moved it to Washington and said to all the folks who wouldn't travel to New York or didn't know that these things were going on, look, you can listen to Special Representative Margot Wallstrom on sexual violence and conflict and make the case for why that's important, learn about these issues and how the UN has dealt with it in this context coming out of the 1325 and sister resolutions. You can learn from the chairman and the Joint Chiefs of Staff about what this means for the military and for a national security perspective. You can hear from civil society activists, defense contractors. It was a very, very diverse group. And from there, we kind of took two-pronged strategy. One was publicly raising awareness about 1325 issues, and then privately working in an ongoing basis with Sharon and her colleagues from across the agencies in the US government on how to conceptualize what was going to be in the National Action Plan. We started with our first document, which was a memo to that interagency drafting committee, saying there are a few things that we really think need to be in this National Action Plan, no matter what shape it takes. We've had 10 years of learnings about what's worked and what hasn't, and here's what we really need to see. We need to see gender analysis on everything. Any program, any policy, anything you're doing, we want to know how it's impacting women, we want to know how it's impacting men, the goal being that everybody comes out better than before, which seems kind of elemental, but is super necessary and by far does not always happen. And so that's one. There needs to be inclusion. It needs to be an inclusive process. You need to talk to women on the ground. You need to talk to women's peace groups. You need to talk to the female parliamentarians who are leaders, but who may, be operating in an environment where their colleagues are turning off their microphones, or they can't say things, or they can't contribute. You need to meet them where they are and make a process for those women to contribute at the grassroots, and then also with us, your colleagues in civil society here in DC who have this experience to share. Resources. This is a trickier one in this climate. Everybody knows what the financial state of affairs is, but the sense that you can't do much if you don't put the money behind it, and that women's issues usually do get a lot of talk and less walk when it comes to the finances. And then accountability. We want to know which office and which agency is responsible for these things. We want to know what kind of timeline you're working on in terms of when you're going to be rolling out the things that you say you're going to be doing. We want to know, resources to a certain extent are an accountability measure as well. So we're very pleased to see that there's a number of those initial recommendations that have been incorporated in the National Action Plan. There's a strong emphasis on inclusion. There's a strong emphasis on, there's a 150-day window where these agencies are supposed to be putting together their work plans, which was a hook for us to come and say, all right, here's our top 10 recommendations of the first actions that you need to take in this 150-day window. There is, I think, certainly on an individual level, amazing advocates like Sharon who are sitting in this group who are very keen to hear from us and are keen to keep those doors of communication open, which is really important. And the institutionalization pillar, I think, is a significant add-on to the thematic emphasis, which is to say, saying we want to figure out a way to make this as entrenched in the US government as possible. Accountability is really the area in terms of resources that I'm the most concerned about going forward. in terms of what the working group will be doing moving forward. We're breaking off into different groups that are going to, for instance, do outreach to the Hill, where the appropriators sit, and talk to them about what is this National Action Plan, what does it mean for the American foreign policy mechanisms, and how can they support it. So that's one, and then we're also thinking about how we can best institutionalize our own relationship moving forward and advising these agencies who have to implement this thing stat. So I can go into any of that, any level of detail later. Just quickly to let you know that this timeline outlines pretty much everything we've done on the table out front. There's a glossy version that we released a little bit subsequent to our internal memo that lays out, some facts and myths about women, peace, and security, as well as our core recommendations, which remain relatively consistent. And then I don't think this is out there, but we do have our 10 recommended actions in this 150-day window, if anyone's interested in that. So stay tuned, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.